2023 meeting of the Environmental Quality Board. I am Nancy Daubenberger. I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Transportation and the Chair of the EQB. And first of all, in meeting announcements, I'd like to go ahead and welcome a new EQB member. We have her here today in the room, Tamar Grandval, with the Department of Administration. So Tamar, if you wouldn't mind, you want to just go ahead and share a little bit about your background or introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. Thank you, Nancy. My name is Tamar Grandval. I'm the new commissioner at administration, and I'm in my second week. So not yet here 2 weeks, just in my second week. But I did have the opportunity to meet a lot of leadership and other folks in at the state travel relations training in person last week at the Prairie Island community. My background, I am a lawyer. I spent almost all my career in public service. I spent the majority of my career, so about 12 years at the State Attorney General's office, and about 10 of those years managing several divisions, representing several different state agencies in litigation. So managed the litigation for the Minnesota Department of Revenue, the Minnesota Department of Education, the Higher Ed Office, as well as Minnesota State, which was MNSCU at the time, and some of the pension boards and more, it was budget constraints. So I think the reward for doing good work was getting more work. So spent most of my career there. I then went on to be the general counsel at the Minnesota Department of Commerce for about a year before Governor Dayton at that time appointed me to the tax court as a judge on the tax court. So I was on the tax court for a little over 2 years. And then I went from that position to the University of Minnesota, where I ran their Office for Conflict Resolution, which is essentially, I was the director and legal counsel working with employees at all levels across all 5 campuses plus extension on a wide range of not just employment law issues, but issues where people were seeking assistance. So a lot of that position was doing mediation, but also employment law work and many other things too. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'm very excited to be at admin and work and diving in and working on all the things that admin works on, and also looking forward to collaborating with a lot of the folks here and across the enterprise. So thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for stepping up, taking on the commissioner role for admin and being a part of our EQB board. Look forward to working with you on our shared goals. So why don't we now go ahead and do the roll call. Executive Director Nuschler, would you please call roll?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think we're expecting about 11 folks today, so I will check. I don't believe Commissioner Arnold could join us, but we are expecting Lisa Polish from Commerce. Okay. Board Member Bakken was a question mark. Is Board Member Bakken with us? Right. Board Member Bauer Kemper. See you.
Here, thanks. Hi.
I don't believe we're expecting anyone from the Department of Health. Do we have anyone? Oh, I see David. Do we have Dan? Okay. Commissioner Daubenberger, I see. Board Member Foster.
Here, hello.
And Commissioner Grandval, you are here with us. Board Member Hintz.
I am here and I am in the car, so I have to stay off camera.
Yes, stay safe. Board Member Katzenberger.
I'm here online.
Excellent. I know Commissioner Kessler could not be with us. Kate is with us today. Board Member Martin. Here. I don't believe Commissioner Verlick is joining us. We have Deputy Commissioner McKinnon. Correct?
Good afternoon. Yep.
Board Member Nelson.
Present.
Commissioner Peterson.
Present.
Commissioner Stroman.
I am here online. Hello.
Okay. Chair Holman.
I am here.
And I believe we're expecting Sue Vento from my council. Is Sue with us? I thought I saw her. Okay. Well, she's here. Okay, she's here. Okay, Sue, I know we have to figure out Sue's sound. I think she sometimes has issues with the microphone, but we're glad you're with us. So, Madam Chair, we've got 11, which is a quorum, which would be 9.
All right, then we can move on to the approval of the consent agenda. And so that has the meeting minutes of the September 20th, 2023 EQB meeting. It starts on packet page 5, and then the preliminary agenda for today's October 18th.
I'll move the consent agenda for today.
Thank you. Consent agenda moved by Commissioner Anderson, and second?
Second.
By board member Martin, excuse me. All in favor? I'm sorry, any discussion on the motion? All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Hearing no opposition, the motion carries. The consent agenda is adopted. One thing I did want to note, make sure you saw in the minutes that were captured at the end of the last month's board meeting, we ran out of time for public comments and asked those who had waited through the long meeting. We had a very full agenda last month, but to please send in their comments via email, and those were part of the packet too. So hopefully you got a chance to look through those. Okay, so then the next item on the agenda is the Executive Director's report, and I will turn it to Executive Director Schiller for that report.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for being here for our October meeting, whether you're joining us in person or online. I'm glad you're able to be here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our presenters today about the Climate Action Framework, and I'm sure many of you are as well. So I'm excited about that. Just a couple of quick logistics. The meeting is being recorded as we noted, and you will see there is a meeting chat that is visible and open to everybody, but we don't keep that as part of the meeting record. So if you'll combine it to sort of logistical items, that would be great. Obviously, we are in a hybrid format. We're going to test my skills a little bit later and try to use different cameras so you get good views of people. So hopefully that works. If it doesn't, I apologize in advance. We will have time for questions and feedback. If you're online, use the raise hand function. Hopefully we'll be able to see it well in the room. Or if you need to jump in during the discussions, that should be fine. Our board members, if you are online and you're a member of the board or a proxy, you should be able to mute and unmute yourself. To help people follow the conversation, and maybe particularly for people in the room, if you just remind us who you are when you start talking, that's helpful. And if you're online, if you could turn your camera on. For members of the public who might be with us again, I just echo the apologies that we ran out of time last month. We do have time at the end of our agenda today, and we should have plenty of time for public comments if folks feel like it. Feel like they have things to share with us. We do have some just the standard procedures from the past to raise your hand in Teams or to type your name in the team chat if you want to make comments. If you're here with us, we have a sign-up sheet out front, and we'll queue commenters when we get to that point in the agenda. And if you need a reminder of all of this, the procedures and guidelines are on page 2 of the meeting. So just general updates and announcements from me. Just a reminder that we're still recruiting for our 5th Congressional District Board member position. People can apply on the Secretary of State website for boards and commissions. We would love to have applications by the end of this week, if possible, though there's no real formal deadline. We also are moving forward with our projects to help support the integration of climate and climate measurement in environmental review. Those projects that were funded by the legislature this session. The temporary staff position for a climate data analyst is posted for application through October 23rd. And we also have out posted through December 1st an RFP for a contractor to build the actual calculation tool. I think those links have been sent to all the tech reps and to the public board members. So you should have a link if you know anyone who wants to apply for that RFP in particular. And if you don't have that, let Kayla know and she can get that to you. Another thing we're working on is the the obsolete rules report. So every year, the state agencies are tasked with identifying rules that are obsolete and how those rules might be fixed, and then reporting to the legislature. That is due to the legislature on December 1st. Obsolete rules is a pretty narrow definition. It's really things that are just no longer relevant, not things that need revision, no matter how simple the revision is. So the staff have identified 4 potentially obsolete rules, ones that basically reference programs that don't exist anymore. And they've indicated we'll address them the next time we open up the rules. Public comment isn't required on these, but we have posted the draft report on our website for input. And so that is available for a period of time if folks want to take a look at it. So it isn't committing us to any specific timeline. It just identifies, yep, these are ones that are completely obsolete. Generally, just we've been out and about a little bit. October is conference season. So I missed this last month, but Rebecca was up at a pollinator festival in September talking about pollinators. I was on a panel at the Gateway to Solar conference on the 9th, and Kayla and Jesse gave a great presentation at the County Planning and Zoning Administrators meeting last week. So it's been nice to get out and meet with some folks out in the world and outside of this building. And then November, just a reminder for all of you that our November meeting is going to be fully virtual because we're going to be doing breakout sessions and facilitated discussion regarding the EQB strategic plan, and it's hard to manage that in a hybrid format. So that will be fully virtual. And given the need to kind of pre-set up the breakouts, it would be appreciated if you can give Hazel a pretty firm note on your attendance for that meeting by like the 9th or about a week before the meeting so we can get those set up. And we will be setting up the meeting so that public members who want to attend will be able to observe probably one of the breakout rooms. There will be 3, and in all likelihood, we'll split the public up among them, and they will be able to observe the one that they are put in. That's the best way we could manage the open meeting part. And then they can hear it and make some comments later if that works for them as well. So that's my report, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Executive Director Nuschler. Does anyone have any questions on that? Oh, I forgot that one.
Sorry for getting the logistics.
Any? I'm not missing any hands. Is there anything in the chat that's related to, I see the little red note on the chat. Is that anything?
No, I think
So, okay, all right, no questions, then we will go ahead and move on. And so that brings us to the next item on the agenda, the update and discussion on Minnesota's climate action framework and interagency climate work, implementation, funding, and reporting. So we have Kate Knuth, the climate director, and Amanda Jarrett-Smith, climate unit supervisor from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and they'll present the climate action framework update. So welcome to Kate and Amanda.
All right, we're gonna. Is this when you're switching cameras?
This is when I'm switching cameras, so we're gonna.
Wow. This is advanced.
It is advanced. We're gonna try.
Advanced hybrid meetings go.
Yes, and then I'm gonna see if I can push the right buttons to share your presentation. Not that one, this one. Okay. I think you all are good to go.
Do you control it? Who should I
there's
ask? How should I?
Good reminder. I meant to give you this earlier.
Hopefully that will work for you. Okay, awesome.
If not, I can click.
All right, well, thank you, Madam Chair and board members. I'm Kate Knuth, the Climate Director at the Pollution Control Agency. I've been in the role for about 3 months, so also quite new to state agency service, but not new to state climate work, and it's nice to be back at the EQB. I was a public member of the EQB for about 6 years, so spent a lot of time in the, although never in a virtual hybrid world like you are doing here, but big fan of the EQB and excited to be here to share an update on the climate action framework and other interagency climate work we are up to. So do you want to introduce yourself, Amanda? Sure.
I'm Amanda Jarrett Smith. I'm the Climate Unit Supervisor at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Make sure she, her pronouns.
All right, so today we're going to be covering a review of the climate action framework. I know many of you are very knowledgeable about this. There's some new faces who could be getting more of an maybe a first or early or review of it, but we just wanted, so we were kind of all on the same page, give a review of the climate action framework and how we got there. And then we're just a little over a year, I guess a year and a month since that framework was adopted. And so we want to talk a little bit about some of the implementation progress over the last year, and then some of the work moving forward, and particularly focused on sustaining progress through reporting, and would love to have a little bit of a conversation with board members about that. And then particularly, I know we're all in the midst of many federal funding opportunities. One in particular, I think of interest to this board is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. And we're talking with folks from all of your various agencies about this work and wanted to give you an update and have a little bit of discussion about that. So I am going to turn it over to Amanda to a little bit this part.
Background. So there's a lot of overlap with the climate change subcabinet and the environmental quality board, but wanted to kind of lay some groundwork here. So there is an executive order originally signed in 2019 that established the climate change subcabinet to encourage interagency collaboration related to climate change, kind of acknowledging that all the agencies kind of have a role to play, have different roles to play related to climate change, and trying to set up kind of a system for us to be able to collaborate actively together. So in order to, the subcabinet is commissioners and board, board directors and things like that. So in order to kind of make that functional, we set up a system underneath the climate change subcabinet to support the subcabinet. So that's this kind of ugly map here, but we have 6 what we call goal teams. So those are teams that bring together staff and leadership across the different agencies and to kind of dig into different topic areas. And these topic areas, when we talk about the climate action framework, align with that framework. So we have clean transportation, natural and working lands, resilient communities, clean energy and efficient buildings, healthy lives and communities, and a clean economy. And then we have some more kind of functional teams that cut across those different topic areas. So we have a climate communications team, a tribal coordination team, an engagement team, and then a legislative coordination team. And the executive order also established a climate change advisory council, which is established to advise the subcabinet on its duties. This involves community leaders across a variety of different sectors, and has various functions, but especially to promote equity and a just transition. The subcabinet collaborated very closely with the Climate Change Advisory Council on the development of the climate action framework. We're kind of in an in-between moment here, but we anticipate a new advisory council set of members to be announced very soon. Hopefully this week. Hopefully this week. You said it, not me. So, kind of transitioning into talking about the climate and action framework. The framework is one of really the key work products so far of the interagency subcabinet. And why did we do a climate action framework, I think is a pretty good place to start. It really came out of a lot of conversations once the subcabinet was established, hearing from both within agencies and outside of agencies that people wanted to hear and wanted to see what the state thought we should be doing on climate change and wanted to have a space to have that dialogue. So the framework sets a bold vision for Minnesota and our climate work, but kind of the process of developing it and now implementing it invites conversation. It's a space for us to have some accountability. We can talk about when we're talking about reporting, that's really all flowing out of the framework. So what are we achieving? What are we having some struggles on? And then, it was just really honestly helpful to kind of organize our thinking, put it down in writing. And we have already been seeing that it's a great tool for catalyzing action across all sectors related to climate change. So how did we get here? There's a lot on this slide, but the main takeaway is that quite a lot of engagement went into developing the framework. We had a summary of concepts, we had tools online, had a lot of meetings, then we published a draft of the framework, received input on that. We had sectoral working groups that met over a period of several months to give us in-depth input into that. And again, having kind of different ways for people to access in. So online and in person. We collaborated very closely with the advisory council. And then it was published in September of 2022. And I also want to kind of highlight in here that a lot of collaboration and dialogue went into it between the state and the tribal nations that share geography. And that dialogue continues as we're thinking about implementing the framework. So what's in the framework? Kind of the three pillars of the framework. And to me, it's super important that these three things are elevated kind of co-equally. So we have a carbon neutral future, a resilient Minnesota, and an equitable Minnesota. And those are kind of the three pillars that uphold our climate work going forward. We also, as part of the framework, established some new targets that brought us better into line with the most current science related to climate change. And now we're very excited that also the legislature adopted, especially that the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that are in the framework. So we're kind of aligned there and updated the Next Generation Energy Act. So the goals are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And then investing significantly in resiliency, especially over the next 10 years when it can have the most impact. The framework, I alluded to this a little bit when we were talking about those goal teams, but the framework has 6 goal areas. 3 of them are sectoral, so there's clean transportation, climate smart natural and working lands, and clean energy and efficient buildings. And then 3 are kind of cross-cutting, so resilient communities, healthy lives and communities, and clean economy have topics that kind of touch across sectors. So with that grounding in the framework, I will hand it back to Kate to talk to us a little bit more about where we are and where we've come this past year.
Great. So we're a little bit over a year in and wanted to highlight some of the successes we've had in the 1 year of implementation of the Climate Action Framework. And we've made some real progress. We laid foundations for a lot more. I want to shout out several commissioners who were part of the communications work during Climate Week when we were celebrating the 1 year anniversary. Commissioner Peterson had a piece in Agriculture Today. Is that what it's called?
Ag Week.
Ag Week,
Yeah.
sorry, thank you.
Right.
And Commissioner Stroman had an op-ed, Commissioner Kessler and Commissioner Arnold also did some comms work around that. So it was really a good opportunity to highlight for Minnesotans the work that is happening. There's a lot of work happening on climate. So I'm going to talk through some policies, budget, programs, and then reporting where we'll dig in more on some conversation. So policy progress, obviously you all know this, but we got our emissions targets updated, as Amanda mentioned, and then the 100% clean energy by 2040. We all know this, we've all talked about it, but I think it's just really important to reiterate again how big of a deal that is in terms of our ability to decarbonize Minnesota's economy, and it was a big part of the Climate Action Framework as well. Budget progress, also some major investments in climate, and I think the work of the interagency sub-cabinet and then the building of the Climate Action Framework laid the foundation to have a really effective interagency climate budget. 11 of the 15 sub-cabinet agencies submitted budget proposals. They supported all the goals of the framework in various ways, really tried to target some of the main sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and it really contributed to historic levels of funding on climate action across the state budget. I think this proposal was about $700 million. You add in, especially some of the transportation investments that were made that were not part of this, it's like by far the biggest investments Minnesota has seen on climate action. So a real, I think, success of the years of building that process and relationship and structure to make the interagency work really effective. Federal funding, we are also seeing budget progress. federal funding through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is really accelerating climate action, mobilizing folks all across agencies. There's formula and competitive funding available across multiple agencies. I am sure all of your staffs are feverishly working on various pieces of this. And multiple teams at these agencies and in the governor's office are tracking grant opportunities and supporting applications. And I think, coming into this world just in the last few months, to have this kind of interagency structure and set of relationships, and both at the leadership level, at commissioner level, and at the staff level, is just so incredibly helpful to take advantage of these federal funding opportunities. So I think an important part to highlight. And MPCA has a particular leadership role in the climate pollution reduction grants. We'll talk about that more in depth because we want to have some conversation there. Program progress in terms of just standing stuff up. There's hiring happening. There's new programs. Commerce has 30+ new energy programs. Here at MPCA, we got $100 million appropriation for the Resilient Communities Grant Program, and the second RFP for that program just went out sometime this week. MnDOT has EV infrastructure, resilience, carbon reduction strategy, and more. And I'm a little nervous highlighting the programs of your agencies in front of you. So if you have questions about specific agencies, the commissioners can probably answer them. Bowser, DNR, and the Department of Ag have a whole bunch of natural and working lands programs, and there's many more in other state agencies. And I wanted to talk a little bit about reporting, about thinking about how do we sustain this progress? How do we not just make the lift of a climate action framework and then get building these programs and implementing them, but having that virtuous cycle of making the progress and checking in, are we making the progress in the ways we want? Where do we need to be focusing more? So one of the ways we're thinking about that is reporting. And we're working to operationalize tracking and reporting for progress on the interagency work on the climate action framework. So Elizabeth Mexicano from MMB, Minnesota Management and Budget, is helping us lead that work. If you are one of the sub-cabinet agencies, you will be getting a bit more of an in-depth report on this at Friday's sub-cabinet meeting. But we're really grateful to have the help of MMB to help us get in the habit of tracking and reporting on this. There are also 2 climate goals that are part of Governor Walz's One Minnesota goals. One's focused on reducing emissions and one is focused on building resilience. So that's another place we're tracking. And then we've been in close collaboration with the EQB on the Environment and Energy Report Card. We have good story to tell on emissions reductions there. And then we're also talking about how we build more of that climate resilience reporting into the structure and the cadence of the EQB Environment and Energy Report Card. So I have 2 discussion areas, so I was going to pause here and have a little bit of discussion, and then we'll talk about CPRG so we don't forget where we are in the presentation. So the questions for discussion is, how would you all in the EQB like to hear about progress on the climate action framework moving forward? And then would it be useful to hear from goal team leads on a quarterly basis? What could make this useful? So one of the things we had talked about with Catherine was we have these 6 goal teams. Could we have 1 or 2 come in quarterly and talk more in depth about a specific part of climate action? Because right now you're getting this pretty high level overview. It's harder to go in depth as the sort of climate team at PCA. There's goal teams and folks across multiple agencies working deeper on some of these specifics in the different goal areas of the framework. And, as a former EQB member and as, someone who followed the EQB quite a bit, this is a rare space where you actually have some more ability to have that in-depth discussion at the commissioner level. And so wanted to talk with you a little bit about how you think this space could be useful to help us stay on track and be clear about the progress we're making on implementation of the climate action framework. So I will pause there and open it up for discussion. Okay.
Get us back to our to see the people, hopefully. Maybe. And
You might have said it, but on the advisory committee, so some of those people were reappointed and some stayed, or how did that work?
They haven't been announced.
Okay.
My sense is it's a mix of some new and some returning members, but I don't have it's not public. Like,
Okay, so it hasn't, I didn't miss that. then.
You did not
Okay,
miss an
good.
announcement, no.
Sitting here trying to remember, so, thanks.
Thinking
So-
the same
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Thank you for providing this information. So I see a hand up by Member Katzenberger. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a question about how often will other reports be made to the public from all of these subcommittees? Like the EQB is one forum to have public publication and public announcements, but what other forums will these be kind of shown and the public invited into?
That is a great question. The Environment and Energy Report Card is being updated now, will come out next year. Catherine has way more knowledge about that timing and process. I would say the Climate Action Framework reporting is, it is literally in development as we speak. Where when you're thinking about cross-sector, cross-agency, some focused on resilience, some mitigation, like wrapping our heads around all of the different data sources and what's collected and creating like the standard operating procedures for getting that information and sharing it in ways that actually make sense for the public, and also just tracking it for us to hold ourselves, like to have that accountability and progress internally. We don't yet have that cadence. And so I'd be interested, I think that'll depend a bit on our capacity in the state agencies, as well as direction we're getting from the sub-cabinet as we're working through that reporting process. So it is still in development, not yet operationalized into like a regular cadence of reporting. Yeah.
I could talk a little bit about that, but Amanda, if you
Oh,
want.
okay. Yeah, I would just share also, I think a couple of the pieces that we're thinking about are within the climate action framework, there are measures of progress, and wanting to definitely be able to publicly report on a website, maybe in some sort of dashboard, kind of how it's going on those measures of progress. But then also thinking about some of the narrative around this, that numbers tell us one thing, but some of this is kind of, we're developing programs, we're rolling out money, and how do we kind of narratively explain some of that, and balance the importance of reporting with also the time and resources required to do that reporting, and the time and resources required to implement these programs. So I think we're in those conversations and don't have a totally firm plan, but are moving that forward internally.
I could
Go right ahead.
see if I can.
I'll just jump in a little bit. And our plan is to bring the 2023-2024 Environment and Energy Report Card to all of you in January. So for your review and approval, a lot of that report card's been done for several years. I think the last one was done in 2019. And so we want to keep many of the measures that are there, but we have been working with the climate team to make sure we're updating all the key measures to match the new goals. And with Eric leaving, Priscilla's taking over that work with me. So the two of us are working on kind of how do we want to structure that? How do we want to have that report match what's coming out that aligns with what it already has? And then we have started to have some preliminary discussions about, since that is kind of, we have the water plan that we report out regularly on, we have this environment and energy. Is there a way that EQB could support this reporting of the whole climate framework after it gets established by sort of MMB and this group? Like, are we the right place to house some of that larger reporting? And so that's a discussion that we're also having, and kind of depends on, again, with Eric leaving, in all likelihood, I would like to have that position be someone that really engages with the climate work and helps PCA with a lot of the coordination. And I think really make it clear that this is all of Minnesota climate work and not PCA climate work. So that's some of the things that we're thinking about and kind of talking about. I keep, and I think I sent this to Elizabeth, I keep thinking in sort of a pyramid of like, what are the various highest level measures that get shared out? What's kind of the informed people level that might get shared here? And then that the agencies would have their real granular pieces. So there's a lot of conversations going on. I'm excited to hear about it at the climate cabinet meeting on Friday.
Him as well. And I see Member Foster has hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just related to that, beyond just the reporting, I'm curious as to what discussion there's been about using the climate action framework, as a tool that can draw members of the public and other people who might not be involved into thinking about climate change. Because the document, the framework, is such a well-done framework that sets out the rationale and has these areas. It just strikes me could be a good thing to use in the public to because we still face a situation, of political polarization on these issues. And so I wonder, it's really early days. I wonder to what extent there's attention paid to beyond the reporting, in conjunction with the reporting or before the reporting, just using this as an example of a can-do kind of forward-looking approach to climate that could draw in people that might otherwise be turned off by the idea of climate change.
I'll take it, and then you can take it. That sounds good. So I think that's a great question, and we are using the climate sub-cabinet and climate action framework and infrastructure to help support the communication about and implementation of the framework. So we have the Our Minnesota Climate website, which have done some updates to and want to continue to use that as a place to get the stories of the climate action Minnesota is taking out. I think the successes of many different parts of implementation in the last legislative session is a story we're working to tell. The Climate Week communications push this year is an example of that. We work to try to, there's so many different pieces of climate action, like when we do our kind of internal steering committee coordinating meetings, we're encouraging agencies when they're talking about different climate programs, like the EV infrastructure investments at MnDOT or the various energy rebates at Commerce, like to even if it's just a line in the communications, connecting it back to the climate action framework and that we do have this overall plan and path forward. So just encouraging as you're thinking about communicating about programs that all of your agencies are working on, like making that connection and making a habit of that connection to the climate action framework. We're going to be talking about climate pollution reduction grant a little bit next, which is a little bit bringing out the climate action framework in a broader public, but engaging through a specific implementation or a specific grant opportunity through EPA. And I would say we have a local climate action planning grant program that we are standing up at MPCA that we got funding for from the legislature that I think the climate action framework will point to that as we're supporting or distributing resources for local governments to do climate action planning, making sure we're making the explicit connection to our state's climate action framework. Are there additional things you would add?
I think I would just add, I think that as we were talking about, as we were developing the framework, we thought a lot about like everyone needs to act on climate. Everyone has a role to play in really wanting people across Minnesota in various ways to see themselves in the framework. And I think you're kind of touching on that a little bit, that we wanted people who don't necessarily think of themselves as people who are quote unquote working on climate change to see their work and their activities as contributing towards the framework. So I very much hear what you're saying, that it can be a really, hopefully that was our intent, to be a powerful tool to connect with people across these different areas. I think in terms of activating individuals to do climate work, that hasn't been something that we have been digging into a ton on our team, but also trying to kind of connect with other points within the agencies where we are activating individual members of the public to do sustainability work and environmental related work, to think about how does that connect with the framework. So I think room for us to continue to explore in that area, but we do see the framework as an opportunity to be working on that.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Right. We have Board Member Nelson. Question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I spent quite a bit of time reviewing the draft framework, and I was really impressed with the language that in there that said repeatedly that everybody, like you just said, everybody needs to act, and it's not just a technical solution. So to get to your question about what we'd like to hear about, I'd like to hear more about as you learn or this develops any of that information about activation triggers and how the public is, the stories that you have or how the public is getting involved in this. And I would suggest that you may want to talk to Dr. May Davenport at U of M, who has, and you know, we wrote a book together on this, but activating for the purpose of conservation with citizens and individuals. Some of that same research I think could apply here. And then as for your question about how frequently you'd like to hear back, I would leave that back to the rest of the board. I don't have any particular frequency in mind.
Thank you. And Board Member Martin, did you have
Yeah,
a
I
question?
do. So this is more a question than an answer to your questions, but about the sort of flood of money, federal and state money. Like one of the things that I hear a lot working with, you know, fairly small, like community-based organizations is like that there's, you know, there's new funding opportunities every week or every month or something, but it's really, really daunting to put together. Like in my world, it's like the Department of Energy, and I've worked on some of those, and they are really daunting. And for like a shoestring organization, and you invest like a lot of time, and then they're quite competitive, so maybe you don't get it. And maybe there's even an aspect of like, if you haven't had grants before, then the grantors don't know if they should give you money because they're not sure how you're going to manage it. So like this all seems really important to me in the equitable pillar. Like how are these resources going to move? And I'm just curious, are you or the other agencies thinking about like resources to help people apply for grants, or ways that the state is trying to make that process simpler maybe than the federal agencies when the process comes, like formula grants that come through the state, or what ideas do you have around that?
So yes, I think that's a really spot on question. And two things come immediately to mind. One is federal, one state. The EPA has been hearing this exact challenge. So as part of their implementing with more focus on environmental justice, they're setting up what they're calling Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers. TICTAC is the acronym, in the various EPA regions. And the University of Minnesota has been funded to house one of those technical assistance center programs. And they're explicitly there to help support communities and communities that have been historically underinvested in to get to have the capability to apply for and get access to particularly federal funding, but also potentially other sources of funding. So that's one. And then the legislature funded the State Competitiveness Fund, which is a pretty significant pot of money to try to leverage federal investments or federal funding. But they're explicitly putting some of that out to help communities apply for grants. There was just an RFP that went out recently. I would defer to a Commerce Department person to go more in depth on that. But I think those are two places that are currently funded and trying to move resources to support. And you know, like a lot of these grants, you have to be government or a large business to apply. EPA is putting out, they have not yet put out the RFP, a community change grant that community-based organizations will be eligible to directly apply for, but that RFP has not, or that notice of funding opportunity has not yet come out. Are there things you would add to that?
I think the one thing, and this is maybe a little tangential, but we've been hearing similar things from the tribal nations who share our geography, and one of the things that we put forward in our budget proposal and was funded out of the legislature was some technical assistance for the tribes to access to help them apply for federal funding. And I can't speak to where exactly that is in development, but that was funded in direct response to requests from the tribes.
I will just add to that too, that in the transportation bill, there was something similar as well, where we were hearing after the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act bill passed that the amount of funding that was for discretionary grants was going to be challenging for especially smaller cities and tribal governments or rural counties. Those agencies who have smaller staff to apply for, and had a proposal that did pass in legislation in 23 that funded it was $2 million and up to $30,000 per agency requesting technical assistance. So that, as well as state match dollars to federal grants that are received too. So the legislature certainly heard these concerns and passed technical assistance funding last session. So are there other questions or thoughts on what was proposed about some updates or the questions on reporting? I will just say I'm sorry, go ahead, Chairwoman.
I would just add once a year would be my personal, I'm always cautious about not wanting to overburden the agency staff either for having to create multiple reports and venues to present them. You know, if you're doing a reporting mechanism or a dashboard, as you suggest, it seems like an annual check-in would be a place I would really appreciate. Wouldn't have to be quarterly or more than that. And I'm assuming there's something like that already afoot. So, thank you.
How many goal areas were there?
There's 6 goals.
Six.
Yeah.
So, and I know there was a suggestion that even just having them come quarterly, if that was the case, we get 4 in per year, right? 4 updates per year for goal areas. So do something like that.
I think, Madam Chair, right now, my very preliminary 2024 plan, I think I might have 3. So it's sort of like maybe 2 goal teams at a time, but we are trying to be very mindful about I mean, I think across the board in our plans, we don't want people like recreating new things or making things so they don't all align. So we are being mindful of that. And I think, Madam Chair, that I heard that Lisa Polish from Commerce maybe wanted to weigh in on the question that Kate raised.
About the competitiveness fund?
Yeah,
that would be great.
Lisa, if you want to go ahead, that would be great.
I actually dropped something in the chat, and what I'll just convey is that Commerce did announce a local grant development assistance program opportunity, which is geared toward exactly that idea of providing support to folks to pursue grant funding. And I put in the link as well. So there's a request for proposals. Folks can get up to $300,000 to support their efforts to pursue federal funds. And that is open until November 13th.
Thank you, Lisa.
Just to clarify, so that RFP would hire like an entity that could then help other organizations apply for funds? Is that the idea? Or those entities themselves could get money to like help them maybe hire a consultant to, how would that work?
Yes, to both of those things. So there are, regional development organizations scattered across the state were some of the folks that initiated this idea, and that there could be funds that would go to regional development organizations to then help support local communities or community-based organizations pursue funds. But other eligible entities are, the Minnesota Rural Electric Association or MMUA on behalf of their utilities, but also community-based orgs. And so there is an intent. Many of the regional development organizations are not in the metro. And so there's a recognition that there will need to be other entities who could then be advancing that supportive work for community-based organizations based in the metro area.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about climate pollution reduction grants, which is one of the many pots of federal money that's the state is potentially going after. And we wanted to bring this one to the EQB to talk about because it is a very open kind of cross-sector, cross-agency potential grant program with a pretty significant size of potential grant opportunities. So the main purpose of the climate pollution reduction grant program is exactly in its name. It's to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or climate pollution. So it's not technology specific or sector specific. It's about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And there's additional priorities in the program to identify strategies that local, tribal, and state government can implement, maximizing benefits, co-benefits, in addition to emissions reductions, especially for low-income and disadvantaged communities, leveraging other funding sources, and then encouraging collaboration and potential for scaling across jurisdictions. So this funding program is a $5 billion pot of federal money. It's coming out in two different phases. The planning grants have already gone out as a $250 million. We at the state of Minnesota, with the PCA as the lead agency, but other agencies involved, have a $3 million planning grant. The Met Council also has a planning grant, and then a couple of tribes and one intertribal organization also has planning grants. And we'll talk about what those planning grants are doing and why they're important. But then the competitive implementation grant notice of funding opportunity just opened up just a few weeks ago, and that's $4.6 billion, $4.3 billion for general competition, and then $300 million for tribes and territories specifically. So the planning grant, the money, the $3 million formula money that we got as a state, we're using this fund to create what's called a Priority Climate Action Plan, a PCAP, if you might have heard you folks on your teams talking about it. And the reason this Priority Climate Action Plan matters is it helps us focus our work. We're drawing on the Climate Action Framework. We're drawing on this interagency work that has already stood up and well underway. It's a requirement by the EPA to put priority actions for emissions reductions and quantify the expected reductions from those measures. And we're seeking input for priorities from local government, tribal nations, and the state. And this plan is due March 1st, 2024. The CPRG planning grant matters a lot. The Priority Climate Action Plan matters a lot because in order to be eligible for an implementation grant, the measure has to be included in our Priority Climate Action Plan. So sort of think of it as a key that unlocks implementation grant eligibility. As I said, $3 million of a planning grant. We have interagency agreements for funding work at DEED and at the Minnesota Department of Health. And we're working with climate sub-cabinet agencies on engagement and on developing project ideas. So we have lots of conversations with various agency folks that we've already had and will be continuing to have. And the implementation grant funding opportunity is out. And as I said, 4.3 general competition, 300 million for tribes and territories. These are grants are a range of sizes, $2 million to $500 million. And there's 5 tiers of the competition based on the dollar amount being sought. So like a $5 million application won't be directly competing with a $400 million application. In order to be eligible, projects must be included in our Priority Climate Action Plan or in the Priority Climate Action Plan of the Met Council or one of the tribes. And the state of Minnesota will be seeking funding, but we're very early in the process of figuring out exactly how much and what for. But we at PCA are really working with our sister agencies to work through that process of figuring out what we will be going after. We are also doing public engagement in this work. You can go to the PCA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant website. I just want to make sure you had that. We're doing sectoral based webinars that are already underway. The Natural and Working Lands webinar was earlier this week. We had some folks from Department of Ag and I think Bowser with that and DNR. And then we're doing several more sectoral webinars next week. So we really appreciate the staff from multiple agencies stepping up to make these webinars happen. And then we also have an engagement HQ site, which you can see in the lower corner there, which helps the public understand where we are in the process and where we're moving in the process. And there's a lot of interest from local governments and others about this money because, and I should have said this if I didn't, local governments, tribal governments, and then state government is eligible to apply. So community-based organizations are not eligible to apply, but given the amount and the sort of flexibility of this funding, there's a lot of interest in, we've seen a lot of interest from different community groups. Just going to throw the timeline. I find this to be one of the most useful slides, so I will ask you to look at it pretty closely. As I said earlier, that Priority Climate Action Plan, so including different measures to reduce emissions and quantifications of emissions reductions, is due March 1st. So that's coming up quite quickly. And applying for implementation grants is due April 1st. So you'll notice those are 1 month apart. And so we are essentially working on these two things simultaneously. They're not exactly the same work, but they are very intertwined. And these are pretty short timelines for developing a whole Priority Climate Action Plan and a multi-hundreds of $million grant application. So, just being aware, if we are asking our agency partners to do things pretty quickly, uncomfortably quickly at times, but in timelines dictated by the EPA deadlines. So with that, I thought we'd bring a few questions for discussion, but we are happy to answer questions if you have questions. But we're really interested in hearing what kinds of projects are you excited about your agency contributing to. I will say we are having staff level conversations and assistant level, commissioner level conversations about this too, but would love to hear in this venue what those could look like. And then what priorities do you see, including specifics, as important to include in the Priority Climate Action Plan? So these are kind of the same question, but not exactly. There might be important projects that you would love to see included that maybe your agency would not necessarily be involved in, but we want to see, we're trying to get a sense of the landscape of where there's sort of energy and interest in moving specific projects or policies or programs forward. And then obviously happy to answer any questions or take any other comments on the CPRG program from folks too. Do you have anything you'd add?
I think one thing I would add is, especially we have member Bauer Kemper on the call, and he is supporting, we did fund a graduate student at the University of Minnesota Duluth in their tribal sovereignty program. And member Bauer Kemper is helping us kind of facilitate our work with that graduate student, and that graduate student is helping us kind of coordinate with the tribes. Because tribes are eligible to apply for implementation funding, some sought and received their own planning funding, but some want to make sure that their priorities are within our plan. And so the graduate student is helping us to hear from tribes, make sure that the tribal priorities are in our plan so that they have access to funding, implementation of funds for their projects as well. And then also hopefully providing some assistance between the tribes as they think about what they want to have in their plans and if there's any coordination that they want to have amongst themselves. So very appreciative of that assistance from member Bauer Kemper, and really excited about that collaboration.
Well, before we go to the questions you're asking us, any questions on what you just heard from board members here? Not seeing any. Would it be helpful to flip back to, now that you already took that down, but to flip back to the slide to just kind of remind here, discussion and questions. What kind of projects are you excited about your agency contributing to? And then priorities you see, including specifics, as important to include in the Priority Climate Action Plan. So yeah, I'll pause there and see who might want to jump in. If you don't mind.
I have a question just for my own clarity in sort of this priority climate action plan, I guess in my head, I'm kind of thinking of it as, we're taking the framework and kind of making choices about key things that fit in the framework that are priorities. So am I understanding that? You're both nodding. Okay. I just wanted to make sure we're making sure that all aligns.
It's a tool. I think of this as a hopefully significant source of funding and process to help us make more progress on implementing the framework. And we're so focused on the priority climate action plan. There are additional parts of that planning grant, including a comprehensive climate action plan that will have to be done in the summer of 2025, which we're seeing as like an update to the climate action framework.
And maybe I would just add to the priority climate action plan. It's not just what our priorities might be, but our priorities that also kind of relate back to the climate pollution reduction grant and fit within kind of the priorities outlined in that grant. So at least that's kind of how I've been thinking about it, because we have many priorities but we need to kind of focus in on things that are relevant for that particular grant program.
So there's specifics in there.
And the emissions reduction, and particularly near-term emissions reduction. So there's not only a focus, but a significant focus on 2025 to 2030 emissions reductions. And there's some scalability focus, and then the co-benefits with like criteria pollutants like NOx and SOx and diem 2.5, but like things like co-pollutant reductions as well as other co-benefits particularly for low-income and disadvantaged communities. So that's a chunk of the work the Department of Health is going to be doing, is that analysis about co-benefits in the low-income disadvantaged community. I'm looking at Amanda, who has been involved with the planning grant from the beginning, as I'm kind of coming in just a few months ago. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
And the other, not clarification, but just further explanation is there is, this significant flood of resources. One of the exciting things and just challenging, I think, you all to think about is there are state government folks across agencies working to apply for and also to leverage and implement various pots of state and federal money. This is a source of funding that is able to sort of fill in some of the gaps or really help us go all in on a particular problem or challenge that we haven't been able to figure out the funding for in other ways. So that's one of the things I'm really excited about with this, is that it enables us to kind of think bigger and without the sort of limits of programmatic, like the structures we already have of programmatic funding. But like, if you brought in a significant resource, how could that help us make a big leap in a certain part of the emissions reduction challenge?
I'll just offer this is Nancy from MnDOT, that from the MnDOT standpoint and working on our carbon reduction strategy, we have a draft, but excited about our priority areas of moving toward electrification and different travel options, different modes, the infrastructure and operations. And so these are our priority areas too, and considering what would be good within those priority areas to apply for grants, as we move towards some of those areas. So I think we'll be continuing to work with the Climate Action Framework group, the sub-cabinet, on what might be competitive or a good use of those grant dollars as we're pursuing those options. Other agency going to jump in, thoughts on that?
Madam Chair, the only question I have is, I'm not prepared probably to represent the agency. I'm new there and I'm new here, so I don't want to carry that authority. But I do want to know, is there still time for me to make those internal connections and have staff and folks?
Oh, yeah.
I'm assuming you're already connected to Bowser lead staff and probably getting anything to offer. But just out of the box, I think about the RIM program, Bowser, and the constituency that's built by landowner engagement. Those people are part of a RIM family forever, and we're talking about millions of acres. And so the ability to stack climate resilience and other types of programs on top of kind of a built constituency and a relationship with those landowners, I'm really excited about that. That's just one thing. I didn't want to leave out or short change other things, from the agency, but I do want to kind of connect to staff and get back to you with a better list.
And we are in regular conversation with John Jaschke and I think also from Bowser. So yes, we are actively continuing to work through interagency relations.
It's with some of like the working lands, piece and everything that they're working on.
I think I might also add, maybe our questions sounded a little bit targeted at the agencies,
Yeah.
but we definitely would be interested in hearing from the public members here too as
Yes.
well. What are things that you're excited about in your communities related to climate pollution reduction?
And we have hand up. Go ahead, Board Member Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a little difficult for me to think of projects or programs related to this agency because we're not really a separate agency, and so we have the 9 commissioners. But one of the things I have kind of thought about, and it comes from my background of having worked for a local unit of government, particularly county, is that when alternative energy proposals have come in, whether they're solar garden or wind farm or something, frequently, if they're new, the local land use authority is not ready for that, and they don't have appropriate zoning already established, or you get the public out there that reads a bunch of stuff and shows up at meetings with all kinds of concerns and objectives that they're not ready to handle. And I'd wondered several years ago, for lack of a better term, whether some sort of generic EIS would be appropriate to lay out what are the actual real or potential impacts of some of these alternative energy systems if they're put in, that would kind of be useful for multiple local land use authorities to handle these types of questions, rather than each one putting a moratorium on them until they go out and research them themselves, and then put in the appropriate zonings and those types of things. Is that a role that is potentially valuable and that the EQB could play, and maybe even be necessary or not necessary? Maybe those types of things have been handled, but if there are new alternative things coming up, is there some role there for the EQB? I don't have the answer. I'm just throwing it out. Sorry.
Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I could talk briefly about that. I think that's a really interesting idea. A GEIS, that wasn't necessarily something that had crossed my mind previously. I think some of this question did come up at the panel at the solar conference. And Lisa from Commerce was on that panel with me as well. And the fact that like the mandatory categories just talk about electric generating, and they're not fleshed out into different parts. Maybe that's one thing that we should talk about in the mandatory categories report as we get through that, try to figure out what people want from that. I think we have talked a little bit about this. I think there remains questions about this, like, can we help support good siting of these kinds of climate mitigation strategies? And I know that Commerce is working on some of that. And there's actually, if we get done on time today, I'm going to hop on a call with them thinking about some of that. So I am thinking very much about, is there a space that EQB or a space for EQB to act in terms of that improving conversation, engagement, location of some of these climate mitigation technologies? For sure. And I will now add GEISs to my thought process on that too.
You. All right. And I see a hand up. Is that Riley Hintz? Go ahead, Board Member Hintz.
Thanks. And I'm sorry that I'm driving, so it's a little hard to be as focused here. But I just wanted to commend Paul's comment and support that as a public member. I think, and having interviewed a lot of local government staff in the first couple years at my job, it seems like a lot of times, especially when new or emerging issues come through, that everyone is scrambling at the local level and there just aren't the same resources available consistently throughout each of the LGUs across the state to be able to handle those. And if there aren't relationships already built among counties to share those strategies, then they're starting from scratch. And of course, I'm thinking particularly about nitrates right now, but I imagine for climate and for flood mitigation, thinking about the communities on the river, there's so many different areas where we should be giving counties more support, and from my perspective, and if the EQB could consider that role, specifically thinking about, like, you don't have to do a moratorium every time to figure it out. That resonated with me a lot, so I just wanted to reiterate that support for that comment Paul made. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Hintz. Other thoughts or questions? You see another hand up? Okay. All right. And here in the room. All right.
Well, great. Then we put a lot out at you today. Just a reminder that we have our engagement HQ set up. You can read, there's staff contacts on the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant page. If your community members or local governments or staff come to you with questions about this, like, we are actively in the process of collecting priorities from local governments, from communities across the state, from agencies, and making sense of them, and relatively quickly, especially by the pace of government standards, moving forward on the priority climate action plan with the draft, definitely before the end of the year. In December, we're looking at. So stay tuned and stay aware, because this is a quick process.
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to updates on that. Thank you both for the information you provided today and the discussion. Very helpful. Okay, thank you. So then, next on the agenda, our Executive Director Nushla will present the revised per diem and expense policy, which is on page 10 of your packet. And I believe this one we had on last month's agenda, so if you feel like you had already read this, yeah, you probably did. So, but we moved it to this month to talk about. So go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. So this is just kind of an update to an existing policy under various Minnesota statutes, 115 and 116C. The state provides for reimbursement primarily to public members on boards and committees to reimburse them for their time, and also sets out requirements for how commissioners can be reimbursed if they're doing something not on their sort of state time. And so the current per diem and expense policy for the EQB was done in, I think, 2018. And then at this legislative session, the legislature authorized an increase in the per diem payment for public members only. So it's now $55 a day for non-public members and $125 a day for public members. And then there's a requirement that all boards and commissions set forth their own policies for what constitutes a day spent on activities, what kinds of expenses are eligible, and things like that. And so this is our policy, which I have updated in consultation with the Attorney General's office. So it sort of sets out that there's the rate of $55 a day for state agency members of the board, and public members of the board is $125 a day. That expenses are reimbursed in compliance or in I guess, in the same way as authorized by the state's commissioners plan. And basically, we just tried to clarify a little bit that the board's policy is to provide the compensation for regular and special meetings of the board, list out some other board-related activities that would be eligible, and then also a little bit of what's not eligible. And we did put in there asking that the form should be submitted to the board administrator, the form to claim the expenses, at least every other month, just to, deadlines are motivating, right? Just to make sure we have that. And at the end of the year, no later than 2 weeks after the end of fiscal year, to help us close our books. So really that's it. It's just a little bit of clarity on what constitutes the kind of work that's eligible for the per diem, the update on the per diem for the public members, and then a little bit of the update. While the commissioner plan controls it, it was helpful to perhaps have the dollar amounts in there. So that's updated as well. That's it, just that we need to update, or it's a proposed recommendation that we update our policy to this new one with these changes. I'm happy to take questions for Director Nuschler.
I would just move approval of the update then, if that's appropriate. Or the resolution.
Resolution,
Yes.
yep. Now, you know what, and I will go ahead and read it, and then I'll ask for a second. So the resolution is the board resolves to adopt the attached per diem policy, that's in the packet, an expense policy for board members dated September 2023. This policy applies to per diem and expenses incurred after July 1st of 2023 and supersedes all prior policies on per diems and expense reimbursements. So I have a motion for adoption of the resolution. Do I have a second?
The Dan Katzberger, I'll second.
Thank you, Board Member Katzenberger. Any discussion? All in favor of the resolution? Oh, roll call, that's right. We need to do roll call on this one. It's a resolution. Okay, so let me go ahead and do the roll
I
call.
will call the roll. All right, Commissioner Arnold is not present. Board Member Bakken, I believe, is not present. Board Member Bauerkemper.
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham is not with us. Commissioner Daubenberger. Board Member Foster.
Yes.
Commissioner Grunwald.
Yes.
Chair Holman.
Yes.
Board Member Hintz.
Yes.
And maybe be able to travel.
Board Member Katzenberger.
Yes.
And Commissioner Kessler is not with us. Board Member Martin. Don't believe Commissioner Verlick is not with us. Board Member Nelson.
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson.
Yes.
And Commissioner Strobin.
Aye.
Unanimous.
Unanimous. All right, so the resolution passes. Thank you, everyone. Okay, now the next item on the agenda is public comment. And as our Executive Director Nuschler went through at the beginning of the meeting, please raise your hand in Teams if you would like to comment. And we'll call all those who signed in to comment in person, and then those who raised their hand in Teams. And do we have any who signed up to comment in person?
Do not have anyone in person, and I believe, Kayla, will you call folks may have raised their hands?
Do you have a time limit or how does that work? I forgot.
We have 2 minute time limit. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do usually go for about 2 minutes, but we do have plenty of time, so we might be a little flexible today.
Just curious.
I'm not seeing any hands raised in the attendance list.
Madam Chair, I'm hearing that at this time we don't have any hands raised, so we make one more call if anyone would like to make a comment. Please raise your hand or type in the chat. Oh, I see.
It is, let's see. That is.
So Benjamin Moss, you should be able to unmute yourself and please provide your comment.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question just gets back to when we were talking about EV type related things and reducing emissions. I just had a question on conversations about what will be done to support current and new EV charging infrastructure, especially the maintenance and build out of street level chargers. Thank you.
I don't know if we have anyone who has the level of detail that would be able to answer that
I
question.
could share a little bit on that. Do we go through any further public comments and then come back? Sure, we can do that. Okay.
Mr. Moss, we're going to come back to your question once we see if there are other public comments. Do we have anyone else, Sheila?
Not seeing anyone.
I can share a little bit of my knowledge offhand on our one thing we're doing at the state level with building out our electric vehicle infrastructure charging. We have, it came through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that passed in November of 21, set up one of the new programs as part of the federal transportation funding was for states to have a baseline, kind of the ground level of building out EV charging. So for Minnesota, it was 68 million that came to us over 5 years. With that, we and all the states need to put together what we call the NEVI plan, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan. And there are requirements as part of those plans, but each state identifies alternative fuel corridors. We in Minnesota had 2 corridors identified already prior to completion of the first plan, and that is Interstates 35 and I-94. And we need to have a plan for having charging infrastructure no more than 50 miles apart. So we've identified locations along those corridors that we'd like to see build out of charging stations. And so we are in the process of getting a request for proposals out, essentially set up public-private partnerships where we would then have those who are interested in building charging stations apply, and we'd get federal funding to those who are successful in applying for those. And the state legislature approved of match dollars to the NEVI dollars to this past session. So we are excited to be building that out. And as I mentioned, that's for states to have some basic level of charging infrastructure. And that's the federal dollars that go toward that. But certainly, as the years of the plan go on, we anticipate other private entities to be putting those in as well, and that can shape, where we go with the plan, what other corridors we'll identify as alternative fuel corridors as the years go on. So there's just a little bit about where we're at with the state of Minnesota, federal dollars for EV charging infrastructure and where we're going. And so you can find that NEVI plan for Minnesota on the Minnesota Department of Transportation website. And be happy to connect you further if you have questions with some of our folks who are working on the RFP. Any other hands pop up? Thank you for putting that in the chat. So I don't think I'm seeing any more commenters. Thank you for that comment or question, Mr. Moss. And with that, I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. So again, thank you, board members, today for your participation, those here who came in person, as well as those who joined online. And so we are at the point of the meeting where I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
By Commissioner Peterson. Second?
Second.
Second by Chair Holman. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Hi.
Opposed, nay? All right, no opposition. The motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you too. And I will.